Thank you all for joining us for yet another Lunchbox talk at the North Carolina Botanical Garden. My name is David Michaud. I'm the Program and Engagement Coordinator here, and I'll be serving as your host today. And I'm joined in the room by Megan Bergstrom, who is our Learning and Engagement Intern at the Garden. She'll be helping the folks on Zoom with any technical assistance that they may need. Quickly, I'd like to thank our Lunchbox Talk event hosts. We have Dr. Jennifer Runquist and Dr. Al Runquist at the Dogwood level. So we thank them so much for their continued support of garden programming. This event is part of our ongoing bird-friendly landscape series, of which Barbara Driscoll has served on the planning committee. Be sure to check out our upcoming programs offered as part of this series, which is running through April. We also have a lovely community photo exhibit up in the DeBerry Gallery up through March 6th, I believe. And then following that, we'll have a watercolor exhibit. We're looking forward to having that. But it's such a privilege to be joined in the room by this pair of speakers today. We're really in for a treat with these two. Barbara Driscoll is past president of the New Hope Bird Alliance and Eno River Association. She helped create and is the co-chair for New Hope Bird Alliance's Bird Friendly Habitat Committee, which promotes creating bird-friendly habitats. She retired in 2013 after being a physical scientist for 27 years with the Environmental Protection Agency. Barbara's an avid outdoor enthusiast who enjoys watching birds, butterflies, plants, and animals around the world. Her hobbies include photography, walking her 3 hounds, and removing invasive plants. And Scott Carter has lived in Durham since 1979. He graduated from Duke University and worked as an electrical engineer at IBM and Lenovo until retiring in 2020. He's currently the president of the Woodcroft Community Association and serves currently on Durham's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. He and his wife Heidi enjoy family time with their 4 children and 4 grandchildren, and he likes golf, bicycling, woodworking, and learning about nature. Last year, he completed the Master Naturalist Volunteer Program offered by the NC Cooperative Extension and led an impact project to grow a pollinator meadow on HOA property, which, as we all know, can be a daunting task. So without any further ado, I'm going to welcome Barbara to the stage to kick us off, and Scott's presentation will follow. Thanks again for joining us, everyone.
Thank you. Can you hear me? All right, great. I really want to say what a wonderful partnership it has been for New Hope Bird Alliance to be with North Carolina Botanical Garden. And please check out the information inside. I'll be talking about some of it, and the photo exhibit that Emily Oglesby has curated is wonderful. Also, you may recognize some of those photos in my presentation. And let me just do a little bit of PR for New Hope Bird Alliance. Is that showing up? Okay. So we are the local Audubon chapter. We cover Durham, Orange, and Chatham counties, and we do twice a week bird walks, which is sort of unusual, but we do one midweek, Wednesday, and then one usually on Saturday or Sunday. If you want to find out more, you can go to our website and sign up for our bi-weekly newsletter. It has a lot of information about what's going on locally. And then we also are very active as far as conservation and advocacy, and we work on a lot of local projects. So one of the things I do is, as chairman for the Bird Friendly Habitat Program, we do residential yard visits, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end of my program. And I'm going to get going because I'm so happy that Scott Carter is here to show you some examples of what you can do if you are at an HOA. So what got me here? Well, I did work at the EPA, but that's not what got me here. It was my interest in all the little things, because I started a pollinator garden at the RTP campus for Environmental Protection Agency, and all of the people there got so excited. We started with 3 little pollinator beds, and then I expanded to 5 pollinator beds, which became a little bit much for a volunteer group to be doing, as well as actually working at the EPA. So that inspired me to to start working on my own yard and creating more biodiversity where I live. So, you know, basically I can entertain myself without going anywhere. We do travel around the world, but, you know, I love to just go out to my street curb and look at what's out there and all the insects. And basically, if you build it, they will come. They will definitely come. So you've probably heard this news since 1970. Our reports have shown that we've lost close to 3 billion birds. And that's because we count birds, because birds are easy to count. And we have been counting birds for hundreds of years. There's a lot of other things out there that we're not counting that are not doing well also. Butterflies, we now started doing counts for butterflies, I will say in the last 5 years since I've been counting butterflies, the population has probably dropped by 50% locally. So we have some serious issues going on here for a lot of different reasons. And then there's the things we don't actually count. We don't actually count native bees. We don't count wasps. We don't count a lot of the insects, but we know overall that their populations are probably declining pretty significantly. And one of the primary reasons for that is that a lot of the suburbs and a lot of places where people are building, the plants that are going in, 80% of those are not native, and a lot of that is turf. And turf is a huge resource issue because it takes a lot of water, takes a lot of fertilizer, takes a lot of time, mowing, et cetera. So what I am going to encourage people to do is to reduce their turf and get away from non-native plants. And in order to create a more biodiverse yard, and what I have found is I've always been sort of a gardener, but when I look at my yard now, I think about how productive is that plant going to be in my yard versus how pretty is it going to be. And I know natives are beautiful, and they're also going to do something good in my yard. So that's one thing I'm going to talk about. So a bird-friendly yard is going to have these components. And if you plant for birds, you're going to plant for everything else. Okay, so while I'm talking about birds, everything I'm talking about is going to apply to everything else. It will apply to insects and other wildlife. So vegetative layers, food, water, shelter, and I'll walk through some of these things. One of the people who has influenced our program the most is Doug Ptolemy. Imagine, how many people have heard of Doug Ptolemy? I'm hoping that it's like almost 100%. All right, well, all right, some of you have some homework to do. He is on the web. There are some nice webinars that he's done. One of his books, Nature's Best Hope, is a great book, and it talks about how we can do something in our own yards. So I think that's really important that you think about what you can control, especially in these times. What can you control? You can control what happens on your property. And however big or small it is, you can make that something that's better for habitat, for everything. So thinking about birds, and I think a lot of people feed birds. How many people actually have feeders? Yeah. I love to watch the birds at my feeders, but some of those birds you would never see unless you were feeding them. So we have those beautiful pine warblers. They're a little yellow bird that comes down. You go, every time you see it, you go, wow, what a crazy bird that is. But it lives up in the tops of the trees. That's where it would be all the time for the most part. And then we have our birds that hang out in the mid-story, like our robins and our cardinals and our blue jays. They kind of hang out there. That's where they nest. That's where they feed. And then we have our birds that hang out on the ground, like sparrows and excuse me, most of our thrushes and things. So when you think about your yard, think about having something at different layers. And if you look out into the forest, you see there's multiple layers. Think about that when you're planting. I'm going to talk about the food groups that are good for birds. First, we're going to start with insects. So this is actually probably the most important category of food for birds. Birds primarily feed on insects, but one thing that's really critical is when they are nesting, almost every bird has to feed its chicks insects. So Doug Ptolemy did a lot of work, and chickadees, really small birds, he actually counted as they came back and forth, how many insects are they feeding one little brood of chicks? And a chickadee, I don't know if you know, they're about an ounce, they weigh an ounce. They have probably about 5 eggs in a clutch. Little itty bitty birds, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars. And that's just caterpillars. There's other bugs they get. Sat and watched them one day and took photos. There were like little spiders, little insects, anything they can garner. But that's a lot of insects for one brood. So insects are really important. And the thing that's important about native plants is that our insects evolved with our native plants. So while you might think I have a Japanese maple, it's actually nothing's gonna eat that because it's a Japanese maple. Our insects take thousands of years to get to where they're gonna eat something that is not normal in their ecosystem. And out of all of our native plants, we have what are called keystone plants. So out of all the native plants, about 14% actually do the heavy lifting. They're the ones that are the host plants for our moths and our caterpillars. And thinking about your yard, some of the best trees, things that we have that feed moths and caterpillar, actually are trees. So 90% of the caterpillars that eat is created by only 14%, and those are called keystone plants, and that's another term that Doug has been using a lot. So I want to say on our website, and we have a lot of resources on newhopebirdalliance.org that you can just download for if you want to. We have a list of local keystone species. If you look at this list, a lot of them are trees, some are shrubs, and some are perennial flowers. And these are the ones that produce the most caterpillars or, caterpillars. So, Doug, being a professor at a university, has access to extremely cheap labor, which is called graduate students. Who else been a graduate student who's gone out and done labor for one of their professors? So he's gotten his students to go out and beat the bushes, literally, to find out how many insects are on those trees and shrubs and things. And he's come up with this great list, which you can download. But, you can also just look at this. And what do you notice about this list? This is the top 10. They're all trees. When you're thinking about what's going on in your yard, a lot of the stuff that's going on, a lot of the insects that are being produced are up there where we're not even noticing it. I have been in Cedar Falls Woods walking and hearing this like rain. I'm like, it's not raining. And frankly, it was a lot of frass coming down from the caterpillars, and that's caterpillar droppings are called frass. But if you have one tree or you have an area that's big enough to plant something, you want to plant an oak. You're going to get more bang for your buck in a lot of ways if you want to produce something for wildlife. Or any of these trees are actually really good. So that information, along with, we also have on our website, we have a spreadsheet that has information about the trees, the shrubs, the perennials, and it has all the growing conditions, and it has when they bloom, and it has, do they like sun or shade? And that's also critical for what you're putting in your yard. And the Botanical Garden also has a lot of really good resources on their website. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about berries, because when we do our yard certifications, what we notice a lot of people are missing is that middle layer. And a lot of people don't have shrubs. Why are these plants really important? Well, they're important for a number of reasons. And you can see the spice bush is one of my favorite shrubs. It doesn't produce a lot of caterpillars because it's got a lot of chemicals in it, which is why the deer don't eat it. But it does have the wonderful spice bush caterpillar, which I love because it has those huge eyes, which you can see. Those aren't real eyes, those are fake eyes. It's got these very small eyes underneath the head that you can't even see. That's to scare things away, that birds will think, oh, it's a snake. It's got these big eyes on it, so don't eat it. And then it turns into this beautiful butterfly. The reason that our native shrubs are important is because the berries that are produced by this have a high fat content. Okay, so there's a lot of things out there that I pull up. Continuously invasive plants like privet also produces berries. Those berries are high in sugar. So that's not a very good thing for our birds. The other thing is that our shrubs are key to produce berries at the time of year. It's important for birds who are migrating. So when birds migrate, they lose about 30% of their body weight every day. They've got to recharge. They've got to have a place to stop and eat. It may not be a national park. It may be your yard. I mean, that's why your yard is important, because when they're flying, they're not like, hey, I think I'm going to turn left here and go to the Smokies, or I'm going to go somewhere. They're flying as fast as they can to get south. So thinking about native shrubs, spice bush, dogwood is a small tree. Somebody's got a rooster going off. Anyway, dogwood is great. If you have, you will see thrushes like this wood thrush in that. I have a lot of American beauty berries, and the thing that's wonderful about them is that everybody in my neighborhood now has beauty berries too, because these are very popular with the birds. They get stripped right away in September, October. Those beautiful purple berries are eaten very quickly by everything. And then we have chokeberry and inkberry. And by the way, most of these shrubs are pretty deer resistant. They're not going to get eaten by the deers because they are a little bit more aromatic. Oh, where's my winterberry? It disappeared. Oh, okay. The other one was winterberry, which is hangs on just a little bit longer. So I'm going from berries. Birds also need nuts and seeds. Doug Ptolemy has a whole book about acorns and oaks. Blue jays, this is one of the things that they have helped spread all the oaks. So he figured out that after the glacial period, pretty much all the oaks that got spread by blue jays, who love oaks and love acorns, and they will take them and they will stash them away somewhere and then promptly forget where they stashed them. The other bird that I like a lot is the brown-headed nuthatch, which is one of our really small nuthatches, and you don't see them very often. They come down to the feeders, but they're up in the tops of the trees, and they have a great affinity for pine seeds. And then, of course, these are the ones that we see around our yard, goldfinches. And you'll see them on the coneflowers and on the rudbeckia. If you leave it, if you don't deadhead it, which I recommend not cleaning up. You know, one thing that, native plantings give us is the permission to be messy, and just be a little bit less clean, and don't clean up. Nature doesn't clean up after itself too much. And then nectar. Who loves hummingbirds? I mean, these are great. I love hummingbirds. So if you like them, plant things that hummingbirds like. And, they have those long bills, and they want to have penstemons or things like that have long. Our coral honeysuckle, which is our native honeysuckle, blooms in April and May. That's when the hummingbirds come back. It blooms in connection with them coming back. Everything is linked together. Everything is sort of set up to help support each other when you think about our ecosystems. If you are here in the gardens and you see the cardinal flowers, there will always be a hummingbird seeking that as its territory. So if you start walking around, it's going to come down and buzz you a little bit, but those are great. And then there's trumpet vine and crossvine. So trumpet vine, actually, if you put it next to like a big pine, it's going to bloom up at the top of the tree. That's where the female hummingbird is nesting. So this is blooming when the female hummingbirds are on their nest up at the top, and it provides nectar for them. Maybe you're not going to see it, but those hummingbirds are sure going to appreciate it. Another great vine is crossvine. That produces a lot of nectar for our hummingbirds. Excuse me. So one of the other things that we need to do or think about is removing invasive plants. And I have been out with some friends and shown them invasive plants, and they said, thank you for destroying my walks, because now all I can see is invasive plants everywhere I go. But, these are worse. I used to call these plant pollution, and they are. But they're actually worse than plant pollution. Think about it. Like, you've got a styrofoam cup. 1,000 years from now, it's still going to be one styrofoam cup. If you've got Elaeagnus with berries, 1 year from now, it'll be 100 Elaeagnus. And the year after that, it'll be another 100. So these multiply exponentially through their seeds. Now is a great time to get rid of that English ivy that you don't like. It not only does it kill our trees when it grows up, cut it down at the base of the tree. It doesn't actually feed off the trees, but once it grows up the tree, it's going to produce berries, and then those get taken into our parks and our other places and other people's yards. So cut it down from the trees, A good way to get rid of English ivy, because usually there's a lot of it around older houses and residential areas, weed whack it or mow it. If you do that 2 or 3 times a year, it's going to cut it back so much it can't come back. And a friend of mine said, I didn't believe you when you told me. She said, one thing it did was, I mowed it a few times, and a good thing was it got rid of the mower. She said, but then it didn't come back, so it's gone. So that's a good way to get rid of that. But we have a lot of information on our website also about how to address invasive plants. Water. This is something that you should think about in your yard. And a lot of times we don't think about it like when it gets cooler, but we've had a lot of weird droughts. I mean, droughts like in May when, I've had friends of mine in the landscaping say, I usually don't have to water anything now, but I've been watering quite a bit. So think about it. If you're having to water, then those birds are also looking for water. This is another good way to look at birds. We put in a small pond with a little feature just like this with a rock with water running. Those birds can hear that. During migration, they come down. I will see more migrating birds in the fall and the spring at my pond than at any other time because they hear that water, they come down, they get a drink. But it doesn't have to be that complicated. It could be something like this. It can be a small container with water in it that you fill up. Birds like something that's an inch or less because they'll not only will they drink out of it, but they will also bathe in it. So, that's another feature that's good for it. And then leave your leaves. So thinking about, I do a whole talk on leave your leaves, but if you think about we live in a deciduous forest, things evolved here with our trees. Our trees are our primary source for many of our caterpillars and our moths. As the leaves drop, also the insects come down and they overwinter in the leaves. So if you're getting rid of your leaves, you're also getting rid of a lot of your insects. And there's many insects that need those leaves to overwinter for their chrysalis or for their larvae. If you don't have leaves, you're not going to have fireflies because their larvae overwinter in the leaves and they eat leaves. We have a number of moth species that specifically eat leaves. So we created a whole program. Leaving your leaves is really important. The other things that leaves do is if you're worried about flooding, they can absorb up to 2 inches of rain on your yard, and that infiltrates your yard. So that goes into the ground as opposed to running off into the street. And then, this is just another critical component for biodiversity. So you could be doing a lot of things and not seeing more improvements, but you really need to leave the leaves. That's part of the whole eco-cycle. So we've worked with the town of Chapel Hill. This program we started with Durham, Keep Durham Beautiful. Now we've worked with the town of Chapel Hill. Carrboro and Orange County have also taken it up. If you live in a community that might be interested, let me know. We can provide materials for you to use or to share with them. But each fall we like to have people take a pledge and put a sign up. And I'm just going to tell one quick story here. Am I okay on time? Okay, good. So I had a neighbor who has a lot about like ours, like a 1/4 acre in front, and overall our lots are about a half an acre. And every year he would blow out the leaves and buy mulch and put mulch in his front yard. And in fact, he bought a bobcat and he said, I'm buying this bobcat. And he has a lot of weird cars and things, so I don't think it was just for this, but he bought a bobcat and he said, I know the neighbors are going to want to borrow my bobcat so they can put mulch out in their yards too. And so he did this for a couple of years. And then this year I noticed, and I have a sign in my yard all year, and this year I noticed, I said, it looks like he didn't put his leaves out this year. I wonder if he was just too busy or what. And he's out walking his dog, and I start talking to him about his dog, and he says, well, did you notice that I didn't put my leaves out? I went, well, yeah, but I wasn't sure. He said, well, I saw that sign. It's gotten to me. So, it's a good way to convert people over and let them know that this is intentional. I'm doing this intentionally to help the ecosystem. So providing nest boxes for our cavity nesters. A lot of people take down those trees when they're dead. In my yard, if the tree isn't going to hit my house, or I will cut trees have them cut trees about 40 feet up because it's a great resource for our woodpeckers and our, sometimes dead trees have as much life or more life than a live tree. You know, there's a lot of stuff in a dead tree. But I think that's something that is really helpful for our cavity nesters. Bluebirds are cavity nesters, our nuthatches are cavity nesters. Chickadees are cavity nesters. Titmice are cavity nesters. They need a hole in a box or in a tree in which to nest. So because we don't have that accessible, and I will say that bluebirds population in the early 70s probably dropped by about 80 or 90%. And a man in North Carolina noticed, and he started putting out nest boxes, and then he started selling them to the employees' credit union. You used to buy them at the employees' credit union. Um, and their population has come back, you know. They need nest boxes. I've put them out on some properties, and I think we do a little nest box building thing for kids, and I was talking to a woman. She said, "Well, my grandson was so happy he got that nest box, and he put it up, and he said, he told his dad an hour later, there's a bluebird in it." His dad said, "No, there's not." He said, "Yeah, there is." And he went out there and he looked, and sure enough, there was a bluebird. You know, so they need this because it's all about competition. And New Hope, Bird Alliance, we sell these nest boxes for $20. The one with the small hole is specifically for brown-headed nuthatches. It will also, chickadees and house wrens can use that. The one with the dark brown cover is for bluebirds and anything of that size. What studies have shown is that brown-headed nuthatches can't compete with bluebirds if there's those two boxes. So, you know, we have both on our property, and both of these boxes get used. Another sad thing is that, and these are what I'm going to talk about next, are threats to birds, and then some solutions to these threats. Window collisions. How many people have heard that kind of thump? Yeah. Yeah, it's a sad sound. I didn't realize until I was working at home a few days that how many birds actually were hitting my window panes during the day. So I took some steps and I put up some tape. And these are birds. This unfortunate, I mean, it's beautiful, but it's unfortunate photo is of birds just from Toronto in Canada. That they collect every year and they take a photo, and then they try to convince people to do better. So we think about this and we think, well, where do strikes happen? And the ones that you hear or read about are the ones where during migration is where a lot of strikes happen because birds are migrating. And I would say typically in the fall, we get a lot more bird strikes. Birds are traveling from the north and they travel at night and they don't see glass, they don't register glass. And they will run into it. And 2 years ago in downtown Philly, they had about 2,000 birds got smacked into a bunch of buildings and just fell down. And there was a guy who monitors there all the time. So, you know, part of that is because lighting draws them in. But research has shown that most of our window collisions occur in low-rise buildings or in residences. So there are some steps that you can take. A lot of times the bird will fly off and die later. Some of the things, and we have an exhibit, and as part of the exhibit, Emily and I have worked together. We put up like a little window with some different types of film and tape that you can use. But it's fairly easy to put tape on the outside. It needs to be on the outside so it breaks up that reflection. And there are other things. American Bird Conservancy has done a lot of studies, and they can tell you what's the most effective way to do this. But you know, there's a lot of companies out there that do this now, and it's easier to use. So the other thing we encourage is lights out and trying to keep those bright lights not pointing up to the sky, downward, or shielded. Spring migration is going to be starting very soon, mid-March to May 1st, May 31st. We try to encourage towns. Chapel Hill is a member, Durham is a member, But if you see lights on somewhere in a building at night, you might talk to that building owner and say, hey, do you think you could just save energy? A, save energy. B, turn off your lights at night. We worked with the library here. They used to have their lights on all night. I'm like, why do you have your lights on? Well, we don't really know. I'm like, could you turn them off? So now they're turning them off. After the cleaning crew leaves, they turn off their lights because they were getting a lot of window strikes. There's a lot of glass there. Another thing, cats. Cats, keep your cats indoor, please. They kill up to between 1.3 and 4 billion birds and other things a year. So yes, I know it's a sweet cat, but it is killing things outside. If your cat has to be outside, you could build a catio. A friend of mine built one for her cat, and she said it loved it. You know, it could go outside and sit outside. This way, you know, your cat's safe. It's not going to be attacked by a dog or something else. It keeps your cat safe. It keeps your cat healthy, but it can be outside. And in Portland, Oregon, they actually do a catio tour every year. So it'd be nice if we get to the point where we can do a catio tour here in our area. And then, of course, after you spend all this time working in your yard, please don't spray mosquito insecticides or pesticides. These are broad spectrum pesticides that kill everything. They do not specifically kill mosquitoes. The best thing to do is remove sources of water to reduce the amount of mosquitoes in your yard. So now that we've done all that, we've got a gorgeous yard and we can hear the frogs calling. Has anybody heard the frogs calling already this year? Yes, it's so exciting to hear the frogs calling. And you're going to hear the bees and the insects. I was talking to someone who had just put in a pollinator garden and they said, it's so weird. Before it was quiet, and now I go out there and there's all these noises, there's all these sounds, and you'll hear that if you've created this yard that just does this. So just a quick thing, I have some brochures over here. We do a yard certification. We're taking signs up now. We'll start doing yard visits at the end of April, early May. We probably have 40 people already signed up, so you may not be till June or something, but we have a plant ID expert, a recorder come to your yard. They walk around, they evaluate all your native plants, all your invasive plants. They give you a written report about recommendations to how to improve your yard, and we do that within our 3-county area. Has anybody here had their yard certified? Yay, great. And you get a beautiful sign. Where's my sign? Here it is. Here's my sign. You're certified. You get this lovely sign. Show your neighbors. So, you know, you too can have this in your yard, or you can have grass and nothing else, but you can have this. So it's exciting. All my neighbors' kids come to my yard to see stuff. I say, you can have this too. And then I'm going to turn this over to Scott now. And I'm really happy that Scott's talking with me. He's with an HOA, and I always get a lot of questions. What do HOAs do? He's going to tell you.
Thank you, Barbara. All right. So I am Scott Carter, and in 2024, I was in a program offered by the North Carolina Extension Office in Durham and Chatham counties called the Master Naturalist Volunteer Program. And as a component of that, we were required to do an impact project. So, and with a partner alliance or partner like the New Hope Bird Alliance. And so I worked with Barbara and the New Hope Bird Alliance on my project, and that's what I'm going to talk about with you. So many of us live in an HOA neighborhood, and everyone knows the typical landscaping in an HOA is crepe myrtles and knockout roses and a sea of Bermuda grass that needs a lot of fertilizer and pesticides and water and mowing, and those kinds of plants and that kind of landscape, as Barbara described, does not really contribute to the ecosystem, not to the health of the creatures that are there or the soil health. And so if you're in an HOA, you may have resistance to either in your yard or in the common property to having a more healthy landscape. And so as part of my HOA, we are moving in the direction, and I'm trying to encourage them to go in the direction of having more natural landscape, native landscape in the common property, which we have a lot, and also allow more flexibility in homeowners' yards. So as part of my Master Naturalist program, I created this pollinator meadow as a demonstration, and also trying to get the word out, basically, offer the presentation that I have here to other HOAs who might be curious about this and who are maybe have some champions that are trying to convince their HOA board to move in a friendlier direction. So I live in Woodcroft, which is a neighborhood of 2,100 homes in South Durham, just a little bit north of South Point Mall. And the project was to take a 1,500 square foot, so relatively small area, maybe a little smaller than this room, of turf maintained land to convert that into a pollinator meadow. And this will be for the purposes of convincing the HOA board that here's a good thing we can do on our common property, and also with the residents and homeowners that travel by here, give them an idea of if you have native plants. Here are the plants that are beautiful, and that you can grow them quickly and easily, and also the wildlife and insects and pollinators that will be happy to visit. So here's the plot that we took. It was under a high voltage power line. You can sort of see on the left photo there. Google actually shows the plot of dirt there that we created. And on the right, you can see that it was just turf and weeds and not even very well maintained. It is next to a trail. You can see the gray line there. That's a very high usage trail. People walk their dogs, push their strollers, and ride their bicycles along there. So this spot was chosen because it gets a lot of visibility. So second, after choosing a site, it's important to select plants that are going to do well there. And I knew nothing about these kinds of plants. Compared to Barbara, I'm very much of a novice. Only in the last 2 or 3 years have I learned anything about this. But after doing some research, we picked 11 species of perennial flowering plants and 4 grasses in roughly a 60-40 mix of 40% grasses and 60% perennials. And we were looking for plants that would have a range of colors and a range of when they bloom throughout the spring, summer, and fall season. And with the grasses also adding some texture. Of course, we wanted deer and rabbit resistance. Those are problems for most of us, and definitely in an open space like an HOA common area. And we needed to be able to support the environment that we have here with heat and drought tolerance and the swings, the drastic swings that we have in the weather patterns. So next, quick overview of the timeline. So we started in the end of 2022, and so really the year 2023 was a prep year where we did site preparation with trying to get rid of the grasses and weeds that were in the area. And then in the spring of 2023, we planted the 4 grasses. They're warm season, and so planted those in May and June, about 150 plugs. And then in September, planted 11 species of the flowering plants that would then overwinter and be ready to grow in their first season in 2024. So this pollinator meadow has now had 2 seasons. 2023 was prep, and the first growing season was in 2024. Many of these pollinator plants, we did not know what to expect. Oftentimes they take a year or 2 to mature to where they're going to bloom fully, and so we didn't really have high expectations that it was going to do as well as it did. You can see the photo there from June where we were starting to get a lot of beautiful stuff coming up, the bee balm red in particular. So in March through November, I logged every couple of weeks how things were doing, when it was blooming, whether it was getting eaten by rabbits and deer, how many pollinators were attracted, that kind of thing, as well as to trying to figure out how to keep weeds under control and so on. And this coming year, starting in a month or two, we'll be having the second growing season. I'm really excited about seeing what's going to happen there. So I mentioned we're started at the beginning of 2023, or actually right at the end of 2022. Site prep. We have a lot of anti-chemical people in our neighborhood. Maybe you do too. Don't like glyphosate, Roundup, or other chemicals, and so we used a more natural approach for trying to prepare the area with cardboard and mulch to smother the turf that was already there. See, we had a work day to do that. We also did not use any soil amendments. Native plants like native soil, and so really it's not necessary to add any fertilizers or anything. Okay, I mentioned in June then we followed up with planting the grasses. We were able to do that with plugs. We used that for all of the plants that we planted. We bought plugs from Mellow Marsh Farms in Siler City and some other places. And we use a drill and an auger to drill out a hole, pop the plug in and sort of tamp it down, and it's ready to go. We were also lucky to have a creek that ran right by there, and with a pump system, we were able to water a couple of times to water everything in. And then in the fall, we planted the perennials, and roughly 700 plugs of the 11 species. Once again, it was in plug form, so we could use drill and auger. And we put them in 2s and 3s just to make sure that whatever was growing there, if one plant didn't make it, then we'd have a better chance. And then we also put colored flags out because nobody knew what was going to grow and whether it was a weed. We knew we were still going to have to fight the weeds, and we wanted to make sure we were not pulling out what we were trying to grow. First growing season, we got one more load of mulch, and then we watered twice in this early summer and spring. We weeded several times and then tracked the plant growth and pollinator activity. And then we tried to make it into more of a destination. We added a bench, and we tried to define the area with nicer boundary. This is just showing some inexpensive metal, but we added some wooden stakes there to try to make it look a little nicer. And then really enjoyed the show. So just a sort of quick time lapse here. In April of the first growing season, we started seeing plants come up, and amazed at how many and how quickly and how tall they were getting. In May, it was really filling out with most of the plants were up and doing something green at this point, and maybe a few flowers starting to show. And by June, we had the Monarda, bee balm, and the mountain mint. A lot of the plants were starting to bloom, the aster, the Stokes aster. July, continuation and the evolution there, getting a little warmer. In August, you can see the grass is starting to brown out a little bit. And then September, most of everything is sort of past its peak. There's still some flowering plants that are hanging on. November, pretty much everything is starting to head into the winter period. And then this is a picture just from about a month ago when we had our little snow event. You can see that the grasses are adding most of the texture, beautiful in their own way. That was part of the goal here, was to show people that something that looks a little messy, this was a meadow, not a garden, that it's got beauty in its own way. And as Barbara was saying, nature isn't clean and tidy all the time, and so having something that looks more natural is it can be beautiful and is beautiful. Just zoom in on a few of the plants and how they did. Many of these with pollinators. We had Coreopsis, and bee balm was spectacular, I have to say. That was our most impressive plant. For the first year, it was really amazing how many of these plants did so well in their first year. Then we had butterfly milkweed. You can see a monarch caterpillar, mountain mint, goldenrod, obedient plant, and bee blossom. Coneflowers, purple and orange coneflower, Rudbeckia. Stokes asters also did super well, and our grasses did well. We had little blue stem, broom's edge, and Indian grass, adding the texture and color, and they're flowering of their own. Lessons learned and the evaluation, it was a great success, way beyond our expectations. it really generated a lot of interest by the community as well. We had 4 work days and had roughly 60 people that came out in these work days. And we were fortunate that the HOA was already, kind of convinced that this was a good idea, and they were willing to put a little money forward. So it cost about $2,000, and for this size of area, about $1.50 per square foot, which is very reasonable considering mowing, fertilizing, weeding that same area would be probably more than that, especially as time passes. And plugs were the way to go, we found. You can also start with seeds, but it takes a lot longer for those to get more mature, and so we probably gained at least 1 full season by using plugs, and a little bit more immediate gratification there. We'll say native plants are hardy. Most of them lived, even the ones that had deer and rabbit browse. They survived, getting eaten down to the ground, and they came back up, and maybe they didn't flower quite as much as they would have, but most everything survived. Site prep is critical. Weeds have to be under control. Weeds were, crazy how every month a new set of weeds would pop out, and you really had to take care of those. And as I said, make it a destination. There were so many people that would walk by, sit on the bench, and just look at the life there. There was so much buzzing, bees buzzing and flying around and landing, and it's just really quite alive and active there. And I'll say, if you plant it, pollinators will come. As Barbara said, I didn't know we would get such diversity of bees and butterflies and wasps and skippers and dragonflies, and a lot of these things I can't even identify, but there were dozens of species that came and found this area and just really made it exciting. So to be done, as I mentioned, really trying to get the word out. And if you are living in an HOA or have any interest in having this experience shared with your community in some way, happy to come do that. I think it's a great direction for homeowners and communities to move in, and it was more rewarding, and I'll say somewhat easier than I thought. We had great participation, enthusiasm, and we ended up with a great result, and really looking forward to what's going to happen this season. Thank you.
I'll have you keep that microphone on, Scott. We've got some questions coming in from our online audience. Anyone in the room have questions too, please feel free to raise your hand. I'll bring the microphone to you. One question that came in, Barbara, as you were presenting, just slipped my mind entirely. Let's see. What can folks do who have issues with voles that are eating the roots of their plants and killing everything they've tried to grow?
Is this on? It is on. Okay. Well, voles are part of the ecosystem. I've learned to live with them. I noticed when I was first gardening, I would be spending a lot of money on cardinal flowers and things like that. And every time I would even put them in the middle of things that were not as tasty, I would think. And I would come back a day later and there'd be a little hole there. I'd be like, oh, $9 down the drain. So I started putting some of those plants, and this is an amazing thing. Part of my yard, most of my yard, I think a lot of people's yards are pretty shady. Most of my yard's pretty shady. I only get a couple hours of sun near the street. But in my backyard, I did have more sun. So I started putting native plants in my containers. I put cardinal flower in the containers. Within a year, I had cardinal flower everywhere because it seeds in. But it protected it enough. And I put in milkweed, and I have put everything into containers, and pretty much any native plant will do well. So like if you have a townhome or something, you don't have much space, you can put in cardinal flower, you can put in a lot of penstemons. All of these things will do well in containers. So, I just live with the voles. Encourage the barred owls to come to my yard late at night and eat something tasty. I wanted to mention that we along with Alan Johnson's wife, Lori Meadow, some other people here, Chris helped review this. We have put together a Managing Native Plants Landscaping Manual, and I have some back here. We put this specifically together for HOAs, for people who have maintenance groups, but it applies to people's yards too. So the information is just as useful for your yard. If you're interested, if you have an HOA, if you have a landscaping company, we are trying to crack that nut, which is a tough nut to crack. I'm telling you, that's the one that we really need to work on next. But, encouraging landscapers to do things in a more manageable and how to manage your things so that they aren't coming through and cutting down all of your things like your inkberries and your beauty berries and making little balls out of them so that they don't have those berries on them. You want those things to produce. So that's just a quick thing.
Great presentation, beautiful garden. Was that Third Fork Creek Trail?
Yes.
So for about 20 years, I've been gardening near Third Fork Creek in the back of my house, and the deer pressure is incredible. And I do have the benefit of working in the nursery, so I can trial out different species, but I have a really hard time with deer herbivory and rabbit herbivory. And I noticed that your Monarda, the Coreopsis never gets eaten, that Lanceolata, but the Stokes asters were always mowed down. Was there anything that you were doing differently to keep deer at bay, or do you think this was a lucky year and they haven't found it yet?
I don't know. We had mostly Rudbeckia got eaten, but anything that has mint or scent, or, I think Menarda's got some mint characteristics. The mountain mint was not touched. Also, it's a little bit about volume. I think the denser you plant stuff and the more there is, the harder it is for them to eat it all. So, and with some stuff seeding in and a lot of stuff spreading, we picked plants that were somewhat aggressive and may have to do something about them competing with each other. But, we were somewhat lucky. I was afraid 50% would get eaten. We did have some, but even those, I think, are going to come back. And yeah, so.
Did you see deer prints in the garden? when you
Some,
go
mostly
through?
deer, poop balls,
Poop
whatever
balls,
you call
yeah.
those. Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes density of deer really plays havoc with your garden, but I think density of plants and maybe even the grasses that you had in there dissuaded them a little bit.
I think that helps too. Makes
Yeah.
them harder for them to find stuff, and maybe the edges and the tickling or whatever of the grasses. I don't know how to explain deer. I've used some
Yeah.
netting and stuff in my yard, which is helpful, but yeah, there's.
Well, I'm jealous.
I will say though, Third Fork Creek is one of the most impaired. And so it is important, if you live along Third Fork Creek or any of the creeks that feed into New Hope Creek, eventually Jordan Lake, it's really helpful to minimize fertilizer and dog waste and so on going into those. And so this whole thing is just trying to raise the level of consciousness in our neighborhood.
We'll take it over from this side of the room.
For the bird boxes, if I wanted to build one of my own, do you have measurements for the different hole sizes and the cavity sizes?
Yeah, I think most of that information is pretty available on the website and things. Yeah.
Do you have advice on what height to hang them at?
For bluebirds, I usually like to put them on a pole to discourage snakes and have a baffle. For the brown-headed nuthatches, I usually put those directly on a pine tree because they have an affinity towards pines. But, about this high, 5 feet or so. So you can clean out the boxes as well. So you want to do that just once in the fall. I just remove the material, the old material.
And Barbara, can't you buy the metal plates to go in the front of the box?
Yeah, you can buy excluders that keep the squirrels out, which is another thing you want to keep out of your boxes because they like them too. They like to be in there.
Through these online questions, we got a lot coming through here. Goodness. All right. Scott, how did y'all decide where to plant what, and who is currently doing the maintenance of that pollinator garden?
Our volunteers are still doing the maintenance, which we're hoping this year will just be some weeding a couple times. We're not planning to do any watering. Actually, we did convince our landscaping maintenance company to weed whack which will be in the first week or two of March, just to, the problem is nature will try to reclaim this area, and so you want to suppress woody plants. I pulled out dozens of little pine tree shoots, and so by weed whacking to about 1 foot, you will then suppress some of the woody plants. But if you do that in the late winter or early spring, it won't kill anything that you want to grow, and it also gives the overwintering insects a chance to fully use the stems and sticks and everything that's there, and they'll go through their winter cycle.
Do you have any suggestions for lime? I've used that in my garden a number of times to deter the deer, and as long as I'm diligent, they really don't like it.
I haven't thought of that or tried that, but
I haven't
we're
done- I
trying
haven't
not to add anything, honestly.
I just put it over the leaves,
Ah.
as soon as any kind of a vegetable leaf is exposed, or the
Oh.
tomatoes,
I've
certainly.
never used lime. I can't-
It's just garden lime and a very small amount. I
Yeah.
put it in a strainer,
Uh-huh.
the kind you'd use in your kitchen,
Yeah,
and just kind of
like flour.
flake it over.
Yeah.
The deer really do not care for that. Gets
Okay.
up their nose and bothers them, but I don't go real heavy with it.
I can imagine that's not pleasant.
I've also heard online rosemary as like an edge can prevent
Yeah.
deer, and lavender, they also don't like the
Yeah,
smell of.
anything that's pretty aromatic, if you hide stuff in with like mints and things, they don't like that. They don't like the taste of that. Somebody over here has, yes, you, and then Susie. Sorry, sorry.
In your experience, cultivars don't reproduce true to color or reproduce at all. If you have a cultivar, like I have a Stokes aster that is a
depends on-
cultivar,
Yeah.
and it will not come up from seed.
I think it depends on the cultivar, and I'm sorry Matt laughed, but some people from the botanical garden may have more of a thought on that. But some of them are clones, so they don't necessarily, when they reproduce, they don't reproduce. They revert back to whatever the original
Like that
form was.
blue, that deep red Monarch.
Right. That was a
It comes
cultivar.
up, it's that pink, sort of pale pink.
Huh. It still will be as effective for pollinators, though. I mean, one thing, and that's a whole talk about species and cultivars, but the cultivars to avoid are those where it's multiple petals, like a double flower blooming thing, cone flowers like that. Those don't produce enough nectar for insects. Or cultivars where they have changed the leaf color from a green to a red, that produces a chemical that can't be eaten by caterpillars or moths and things like that. So those are things to avoid in cultivars. So I know a lot of people, if it has the name after it, like Major Gray's coral honeysuckle, that's still a great plant. I mean, yeah.
So I have a willow question. I paddle, so you see all the marsh willows, but what kind of willow do you want to plant in your yard? I used to have a weeping willow that never did well, so it's gone, but are weeping willows, they're probably not native,
I don't know that they're native. I don't know that that would be something I would choose to put in my yard, I guess. If you had a spot for something, I would look for something that is, and like I said, we have a list of plants for the Piedmont on our website that is basically, we're in the Piedmont ecoregion, so you're looking to have plants that are native to our area, which is what the insects evolved with. So that's what I would go to as a go-to list first.
I have several crabapple trees on my property, which I noticed that are good, but they get decimated by the tent caterpillars. And I'm wondering, are tent caterpillars native? Because I destroy them, but maybe I'm doing a really
You
bad
know, the
thing.
birds will actually eat them. So if you take a knife and you just cut open the little tent, the little bag to expose it, then the birds will get in there and eat them for you, and you don't have to use any kind of chemicals or anything like that. So,
Are they
and the,
invasive though? Are they native?
I think it probably depends on the actual insect, and I'm not as up on that sort of topic as I might be. But no, the birds will eat those if you just allow them access to it. Last one.
Hello. I live in a townhouse, and behind my townhouse is a hill, and with pine trees behind that, and then just a hill. I was wondering if, like a garden like you did, could we do that on a hill? Is that possible?
Definitely.
Okay, with the
Not sure if I'm
grass?
still on, but yes, you definitely can. I don't know which ones, you know, are better or worse for hills, but the key about native plants is their roots go up to 2 or 3 feet deep. Turf grass roots are only 1/2 inch to 1 inch. So if you can get established a native plants, then it will really hold the hill much better than anything else.
Yeah, also sequesters more carbon. So if we're, you know, in our age of not to be said climate change, this is, you know, native plants are great because their roots do go deep and they do sequester a lot more carbon. Turf does not, you know, so another disadvantage for turf. I'm all about getting rid of turf if we can. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much again for joining. One more round of applause.